Look, have you ever noticed how some people, no matter what you throw at them, just don't break? You say something that would devastate most people. Nothing. You put them in a situation that would spiral anyone else into chaos. Nothing. You create pressure around them that would crack the average person completely in half. And yet they stand there unmoved, calm, almost unsettlingly quiet. And you find yourself wondering what is wrong with them. Are they numb? Are they cold? Did something break inside them long ago? No, what you are looking at is not damage. It is discipline. It is not emptiness. It is a fullness, so full of their own internal world that nothing external has room to reach them. And the harder you push, the more you realize this. Whatever is happening inside them, it does not respond to your pressure. It does not bend to your opinion. It does not waver in the face of what would normally destabilize a person. And that quality, whatever it is the most powerful thing you can witness in another human being, because it tells you immediately, this person cannot be controlled. For over 2,000 years, the philosophy that created people like this has had a name, Stoicism, but not the version that trends on social media right now. Not the just be grateful version, the good vibes only version, the version that collapses the moment something genuinely hard arrives. That version is a costume. It resembles the real thing until reality tests it, and then it disappears. What I'm going to show you today is the original version, the dark version, the version the Roman emperors and generals and philosophers actually practiced, not when life was comfortable, but when everything was at stake. 7 rules, not 7 ideas. 7 specific psychological shifts that, when practiced consistently over time, make you, in the truest sense, emotionally untouchable, not emotionally dead. Not numb, not cold, untouchable. You will still feel everything. The difference is what you do with what you feel, whether you are driven by it or whether you drive it, whether your emotions are your commanders or your instruments. Think about it. The person who can feel pain and still choose clearly is more powerful than the person who feels nothing, because numbness is not mastery, it is escape. And escape is just another form of being controlled. Real freedom is not the absence of feeling. It is the command of feeling. The first rule is this: you become emotionally untouchable the moment you stop outsourcing your sense of worth to the reactions of other people. I want to be very clear about what this means, because it sounds obvious when stated directly. But most people, if you examine their daily behavior honestly, are doing the exact opposite. They are checking their phone for responses. They are adjusting their behavior in real time based on other people's expressions. They are deciding whether something they made was good or bad based on whether people approved of it. They are constructing their entire emotional experience of each day out of signals received from the external world. This is not weakness of character. This is conditioning. From the moment you were aware enough to read other people's reactions, your brain built a simple model. Positive reaction means I am safe and accepted. Negative reaction or no reaction means I am in danger. That model protected you when you were young. It helped you navigate complex social terrain. It kept you connected to the group, which, for a child, is survival. The problem is that most people carry this model, completely unexamined, into adulthood. And in adulthood, it stops being a survival tool. It becomes a prison. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the most powerful empire in human history, who was surrounded every single day by people who wanted to use him, flatter him, manipulate him, and destroy him, wrote in his private journal something that stopped me completely when I first read it. He wrote, "It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but we care more about their opinion than our own." He was describing this exact trap. And he was writing it to himself, as a reminder, because even the emperor struggled with it. Even the most powerful man in the world had to consciously practice not handing his sense of worth to the people around him. The Stoic distinction here is important. This is not about becoming cold toward other people. You can care deeply about the people in your life and still not require their approval to feel whole. Those are completely different things. In fact, the only healthy version of caring about someone is the version where you don't need them to sustain your sense of self. Because need, when it becomes visible, transforms the dynamic of any relationship. It turns the other person from someone you love into someone you depend on for survival. And that is not fair to them and not freedom for you. Here is the psychological reality. When your internal state is determined by external feedback, you are, in the most practical sense, controllable. Anyone who understands what you need from them has leverage over you. The withdrawal of attention, the withdrawal of approval, the silence where you expected response, these become weapons. Not always intentional weapons, sometimes just the natural variation of another person's life and attention, but weapons nonetheless, because your nervous system cannot tell the difference between intentional withdrawal and accidental inattention. It just knows that the thing it needed did not arrive, and it panics. The Stoic practice, is to rebuild the source of your worth from inside. To locate within yourself the authority to determine whether something you did was good, whether a choice you made was sound, whether the day you lived had value. Not perfectly, not immediately, but progressively. And the exercise that begins this is simple. Do one meaningful thing each day for 7 days that you tell no one about. Not for secrecy, not for mystery, but to have the experience of doing something real without any external feedback and discovering that it is still real, that it mattered. Because it existed. That experience is the first dismantling of external dependency, and it is available to you right now. It feels strange, but it's not magic. It's psychology. Second, you become emotionally untouchable when you master the distance between what you feel and what you do. This is perhaps the most misunderstood rule in all of Stoic practice. Because when most people hear emotional control, they hear emotional suppression. And suppression, pushing the feeling down, locking it away, pretending it is not there, is not only different from control, it is actively harmful. What is suppressed does not disappear. It ferments. It grows denser, more volatile, more explosive. And it will find its way out eventually, usually at the worst possible moment in the most destructive possible form. What the Stoics practiced was something entirely different. They practiced the identification of the space. Between what arrives the emotion and what follows the behavior, there is always a pause, however brief. However fast the nervous system moves, there is a space. And in that space there is always a choice about what happens next. You feel humiliated. That is real. Let it be real. You feel furious. That is real. You feel afraid or heartbroken or blindsided by something you didn't see coming. All of it is real. None of it needs to be suppressed. The only question is what you choose to do with it in the next moment. Viktor Frankl wrote after surviving the Holocaust. Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. He did not arrive at this conclusion from a comfortable life. He arrived at it from the most extreme possible testing of human psychology, and his conclusion was not that feelings are unimportant. It was that the response to feelings is always, no matter what, a choice. Here is what this looks like in real terms. The most dangerous person in any conflict is not the most aggressive one. It is the calmest one, because calm is not passivity. It is the highest form of strategic control. The person who is calm in a moment of pressure has full access to their intelligence. They can see clearly. They can think ahead. They can observe what the other person is revealing through their aggression. The reactive person is doing the opposite. They have handed their enemy the ability to dictate the quality of their decisions simply by controlling their emotional temperature. The practice here is the pause, trained deliberately until it becomes automatic. The next time something arrives that makes you want to react immediately, pause for one breath, not for drama, not as a technique anyone else needs to see, but because you have built the habit of finding that space between feeling and response. And in that space you ask, what is the most useful response here? Not the most satisfying, not the most immediate, not the one that makes the feeling stop, the one that serves your actual interest. That question, asked consistently, will permanently change the trajectory of every difficult conversation you have. Now the most important part, because this is where dark psychology enters this conversation in a way that most people are genuinely not prepared to hear. Third rule, your unexamined emotional triggers are always someone else's leverage. Think about this carefully. Most people believe their emotions are private, internal, something that belongs exclusively to them. But here is the uncomfortable reality. Every time you react to something, to a criticism, to a silence, to someone's indifference, to a specific kind of challenge, you are publishing information about yourself. You are showing anyone watching exactly which buttons exist and exactly what happens when they are pressed. And some people are always watching, not always maliciously, but they notice. The colleague who discovers that questioning your competence makes you defensive. The partner who learns that any hint of distance makes you anxious and overcompensating. The social environment where someone has figured out that a specific kind of dismissal will make you chase approval. Anyone who knows what makes you reactive has, in that knowledge, a form of power over you, whether they use it consciously or not. This is not paranoia. It is reality. And the Stoic defense against it is not to become unreadable as a performance. It is to become genuinely self-examined. To know your triggers before other people discover them. To go looking for your emotional weak points in private, through honest reflection, through journaling, through deliberately placing yourself in situations that test you so that you are not ambushed by them in public. A trigger you have already worked through loses most of its power. When someone reaches for an old wound to press it, they find that it is healed. There is nothing there anymore to exploit. I used to have a specific and very consistent reaction to being overlooked, not just general social discomfort, a specific, almost physical response to being treated as if I were not significant in a situation where I expected to matter. And for years, I did not recognize this as a trigger. I just thought I was sensitive to being taken seriously. It took someone close to me reflecting back the pattern, showing me that whenever this specific thing happened, my behavior changed in predictable ways for me to see it clearly. And the moment I saw it clearly, the grip began to loosen. Not immediately, but the examination itself started the process. Because you cannot work on something you cannot see. And most of the things that control us most completely are invisible to us precisely because we have never looked directly at them. Another truth. The fourth rule of Dark Stoicism is what I call deliberate silence, not silence as absence, not silence as nothing to say, silence as a fully inhabited, deliberate presence. This distinction is the difference between the silence of someone who has nothing to offer and the silence of someone who has everything, and is choosing in this moment not to deploy it. Those two silences feel completely different to the person across from you. One reads as emptiness. One reads as gravity. And in almost every social and interpersonal context, gravity wins. Here is the psychology of why this works. Most people experience silence as anxiety, an empty space in a conversation that needs to be filled immediately. And so they fill it with whatever comes first, which is usually whatever is most emotionally loaded for them. They over-explain. They reveal information they didn't plan to reveal. They show their hand. They justify themselves to someone who was not even asking for justification, simply because the silence felt like judgment, and they needed to answer it. The person who can hold silence without anxiety, who does not feel the compulsion to fill every empty space, changes the dynamic of any interaction they are in, because their silence forces the other person to fill it. And what people choose to fill silence with is always, always revealing. It tells you what they are actually thinking about, what they are actually worried about, what they actually want from you. The quiet person in a conversation is almost always learning more than the loud one. Marcus Aurelius was known for this among his political contemporaries. He would sit through long debates without speaking, not because he had nothing to say, but because he was collecting information that the other speakers did not realize they were giving him. By the time he spoke, the room had already shown its hand, and his responses, when they came, landed with complete finality because they addressed not just what people had said, but what they had revealed between the words. Practice this deliberately. For the next week, in any conversation that becomes tense or high stakes, resist the first impulse to speak. Let the silence sit for just 3 seconds longer than feels comfortable. Not as a game, not as a manipulation, but as practice. You will be surprised how much the other person reveals in those 3 seconds. And you will be surprised how much your own clarity improves when you are not using energy to immediately fill every space. Respect grows where access is limited. Another thing most people ignore, the fifth rule of Dark Stoicism: voluntary hardship as psychological insurance. This is the rule most people understand intellectually and almost never actually practice. Because it requires doing something that goes against every instinct, choosing difficulty when ease is available. The Stoic logic here is precise and unambiguous. If your nervous system has only ever experienced comfort, if you have never been cold when warmth was unavailable, hungry when food was distant, exhausted when rest was not an option, your nervous system has no reference for difficulty. It has no data. So when genuine difficulty arrives, and it will because nothing in life guarantees consistent ease, your mind says, "I do not know how to survive this." And the emotional collapse that follows is not a character flaw. It is simply the result of a system that was never trained. Epictetus, born into slavery, who had every external reason to be broken by the world, taught that the philosopher must deliberately seek controlled discomfort, not as punishment, not as self-destruction, but as training. As the experience of surviving difficulty in a context where you chose it, so that when difficulty arrives uninvited, your nervous system already knows, "I have been here before. I did not break." This is survivable. Modern psychology has a name for this: stress inoculation. It is used to prepare soldiers, surgeons, and high-performance athletes for the conditions they will face. The principle is the same in every domain. Exposure to manageable difficulty, repeated consistently, builds genuine tolerance for the real thing. What this looks like practically is simpler than it sounds. Choose the harder option when both are available. Take the cold shower. Have the conversation you have been avoiding for weeks. Begin the task that requires the most of you first before the easy ones. Say no to the comfort that weakens you, the binge, the distraction, the escape. Not as permanent deprivation, but as regular practice, as the deliberate experience of, "I wanted the easy option, I chose the hard one, I survived, I am still here." Every time you make that choice, you are depositing psychological capital. You are building a reference library that your nervous system can draw on when real difficulty arrives without warning. And the person who has that library, who has been through enough voluntary difficulty to know that difficulty is not fatal, faces genuine hardship with a completely different internal experience. Not fearlessness, but something better. The knowledge that they have already survived hard things, and this, whatever it is also survivable. Sixth, and this one will sound passive. It is anything but. The sixth rule of Dark Stoicism is total acceptance, followed immediately by total action. Most people treat acceptance and action as opposites, as if accepting a situation means you have decided not to fight it, as if you must first refuse to accept something before you can motivate yourself to change it. This confusion is one of the most expensive psychological mistakes a person can make, because it means that the energy that should be going toward change is instead going toward arguing with reality, and reality never loses that argument. Here is what actually happens when you refuse to accept an unwanted situation. Your mind engages with the argument against what is. "This shouldn't be happening. This isn't fair. This isn't what was supposed to be." And that argument consumes energy, enormous amounts of cognitive and emotional energy, while the situation itself continues unchanged. Reality is indifferent to your resistance. It does not adjust itself because you have decided not to accept it. So you end up with the same problem plus the additional cost of all the energy you spent resisting its existence. Acceptance is the decision to end that argument, not to like the situation, not to pretend it is fine when it is not, but to say clearly and completely, "This is real. I did not want this, but since it is real, I will engage with what is real rather than with what I wish were real." And the moment that decision is made, the moment the argument with reality ends, something becomes available that was locked away inside the resistance. Intelligence, clarity, the capacity to see the actual path forward rather than the theoretical path that should have been available if reality had cooperated. I have lived this. There was a significant period of my life where something I had built, something I had tied my identity to, ended, and I refused to accept it. For months, I used every cognitive tool I had to argue against the reality of what had happened. I looked for evidence that it wasn't really over. I built scenarios where it could still be recovered. I spent enormous energy on the question, how do I get back to where I was when where I was no longer existed? And none of that energy moved me forward, not one step. The day I accepted it, not performed acceptance, but genuinely, internally accepted that it was gone and that my life now continued from here, the path forward appeared almost immediately. Not because it had been hidden, but because I had been too busy arguing with what was to see what was possible. Acceptance cleared my vision, and what followed was not passivity. It was the most focused and productive period of action I have ever experienced. Because all of that energy was finally available for something real. This is what the Stoics meant by amor fati, love your fate. Which brings us to the seventh and final rule, love your fate. Not endure it, not accept it reluctantly. Love it, Nietzsche called this his formula for greatness, and the Stoics practiced it centuries before Nietzsche named it. The idea is this: the highest form of psychological mastery is not to survive what happens to you, it is to turn toward it, to choose it. To incorporate every experience, the beautiful ones and the devastating ones, into the material from which you build yourself. Think about the hardest experience of your life, the betrayal that blindsided you, the failure that humiliated you, the loss that you were not sure you would recover from. Now ask and be honest. Not optimistic, genuinely honest. Who would you be today if that had not happened? Not better, almost certainly not more capable, not more resilient, not more able to understand pain in other people, not more prepared for the world as it actually is. The difficult thing did something to you that comfort never could. It revealed what you were made of. It tested the architecture of your character and showed you where the load-bearing walls were. And it made you specific, not a generic version of a human being, but this particular unrepeatable version, the one that survived that thing, the one that knows how to stand in that specific kind of fire. Amor fati is the decision to own that fully, not to perform gratitude for things that genuinely hurt, not to pretend the hard things were secretly gifts, but to look at the totality of what has made you, including the worst of it, and say, yes, this is what it took. This is the price of being who I am now, and I choose it, retroactively, completely, without resentment, not because I had a choice when it happened, but because I have the choice now whether to carry what happened as a wound or as an architecture, whether to be defined by it or to build from it. A person who has made that choice is untouchable in the deepest sense, not because nothing can hurt them. Everything can still hurt, but because nothing that happens to them can be purely a loss. Because everything gets folded into the same relentless forward project, become more capable, more solid, more real. The setback becomes material. The betrayal becomes information about what to protect. The failure becomes the specific data point that makes the next attempt different. And nothing the world throws at you can take that framework away from you, because you decided it. It is yours. The Stoics understood something that most modern people have entirely missed. The world is not arranged against you. It is simply indifferent to you, which is, actually, a profound gift, because indifference means it has no preference about whether you collapse or whether you rise. That is entirely, completely, without exception, your choice. And when you truly understand that, when you stop waiting for the world to deal with you fairly and start operating as the only reliable variable in your own story, something shifts permanently. These 7 rules are not 7 separate techniques. They are one integrated posture toward life. Stop outsourcing your worth. Master the space between feeling and response. Know your triggers before others find them. Use silence as a deliberate presence. Choose difficulty voluntarily. Accept reality completely, then act. Love everything that made you. Together they build something in you that is not common, not natural, not automatic, but possible. Completely, deliberately possible. You become someone who cannot be destabilized by approval or its absence, who cannot be controlled through emotional leverage, who cannot be rattled by pressure, who cannot be broken by loss, who moves through difficulty not as a victim of it, but as someone who understands at a cellular level that difficulty is simply the material from which strength is made, because the strongest position in life is not needing someone, but choosing them, not avoiding pain, but using it, not suppressing your emotions, but commanding them so completely that they become the most powerful tools you have ever held. This is Dark Stoicism. This is the version they practiced when everything was at stake. And now, it belongs to you.